The first time I stepped into that castle, I didn't look up, not out of respect, but by instinct. People like me learn early that looking too much can be costly. The stone floor was cold, even through the worn soles of my shoes, and the sound of my footsteps seemed too loud for a place where everyone moved in silence. I held the small bag with everything I had left, tight against my body, as if someone could just take it away from me at any moment. Maybe they could, maybe they wanted no one there, seemed to really notice my presence. And that was good. This is exactly how I survived invisible. The woman guiding me stopped in front of a large, dark wooden door and knocked twice before entering without waiting for a response. I followed her without saying anything. The smell inside the room was different, cleaner, more controlled. As if even the air there obeyed rules. He was standing by the window. I didn't need to look directly to know who it was. His presence filled the room in a way that was impossible to ignore. Strong, heavy, dominant, the kind of presence that makes everyone around you adjust without realizing it. "This is the new one," said the woman next to me. Silence. I felt his gaze on me before I even looked up. And for a moment, something inside me reacted, a warning fast, I need. As if my body recognized a danger that my mind had yet to name. "Raise your head," he said. The voice was low, but it didn't need to be loud. She carried enough authority to cut through any resistance. I got up slowly, and our eyes met. It was fast, but it was enough. There was something wrong. Not in it, but in the way my body reacted. My heart raced in a way that didn't make sense. It wasn't fear. I knew fear that was different, deeper, oldest, like a memory I didn't remember, but still felt it works. Said the woman, learned quickly, does not cause problems. He continued to watch me for a few seconds that seemed longer than they should have been, as if trying to see beyond what was in front of him, as if looking for something. I kept the expression neutral, controlled breathing, low posture, everything I learned to avoid attracting attention. But inside, something wasn't right. "She stays," he said at last. Simple, decisive, no room for discussion. The woman nodded and left the room, leaving me there alone with him. The silence that remained was not comfortable. It was dense, loaded. "Have you worked before?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "Where in smaller homes?" He tilted his head, analyzing. "How did you end up here?" "I was sent." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. He seemed to realize this, but he didn't press for now. "Name Lyra," replied. The sound of my own name echoed strangely in that space. As if it didn't belong there, he repeated quietly, "Lyra." And then something has changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I felt the atmosphere around him adjusted somehow, as if that name meant more than it should. "You start today," he said. "The East Wing needs people." I nodded, no questions, without hesitation, as expected, but when I turned to, the feeling returned, stronger, clearer. Like something is pulling me back. I ignored. I kept walking. I left the room and closed the door behind me. But the weight didn't go away. On the contrary, stayed sticky like a shadow that doesn't fade the castle. Corridors were a maze of stone and silence. Servants moved quickly, avoiding direct contact, always keeping their eyes down, always attentive. I fit in between them with ease. It was a role I knew well, be just one more. But as time passed, little things started to catch my attention. 2 long looks, whispers, that stopped when I approached, and that constant feeling that something was out of place that night. While organizing one of the empty rooms, I stopped for a moment, for no apparent reason. I just stopped. My heart started to beat faster, and then came an image, quick, strong, unknown, but familiar at the same time. A large room, people, kneeling, and I standing in the center. I took a step back. Confused, the image disappeared as quickly as it came, but he left something behind, a feeling of power and loss. I put my hand on my chest, trying to control my breathing. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered to myself. But deep down, I knew that was just the beginning. I stood still for a few more seconds, trying to understand what had just happened. But there was no explanation, no logic, just that strange feeling still stuck in my chest, as if something had been awakened without warning. I took a deep breath and forced my body to move again. I continued organizing the room as if nothing had happened. As I always did, ignoring was the only way to follow, but this time it wasn't so simple because the image didn't seem like a dream. It felt like memory, and that was impossible. I've never been to a place like that. I've never been someone in front of people kneeling. I never had power. Or at least that's what I always believed. I finished the work faster than usual and left the room, taking the cloths with me. The hallway was empty, which was unusual for that time of day. The castle was rarely completely silent. There were always footsteps, low voices, movement, but there, at that moment, it looked different. Quieter than it should be. I started walking towards the stairs when I heard footsteps behind me. Firm, controlled, I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. His presence was impossible to ignore. My body reacted before my mind. I tensed automatically. "You stopped," said his voice behind me. It wasn't a question, it was a realization. I turned around slowly, keeping my posture low. "I was organizing the room," I replied. He watched me in silence too long. "Something happened," continued. My stomach tightened. He had no way of knowing. "But somehow, did you know?" "No, sir," I replied. The answer came too quickly, and that was a mistake, I realized instantly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Come closer." The order came low, but firm. I hesitated for a second, just one, before obeying. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I stopped in front of him, the height difference meant I had to tilt my head slightly upwards. And that's when I felt it again. Stronger, much stronger. Something between us, invisible but present. My heart raced. And this time, I couldn't completely control. He realized. Of course, you noticed his expression didn't change. But the look became more attentive, more focused. "Lift your chin," he said. I obeyed, and then without warning, he stretched out his hand, stopping just inches from my face. Didn't ring, but I didn't need, because the effect was already happening. My breathing became irregular. My confused mind, like something is being pulled from inside me. "What are you?" he asked. The question hit me hard because it wasn't common. It wasn't about the name, not about function. It was about essence. "I don't know," I replied. And this time it was true more than anything else I've ever said for a second. Something passed through his eyes. Something I couldn't fully identify, but it wasn't indifference. It was interest, dangerous. He slowly lowered his, but the space between us remained charged. "You are not just a servant." My body became rigid. "That's a problem," I added the way he said it. Wasn't a direct threat, but it wasn't light either. It was a warning, and I understood perfectly. "I'm nothing," I replied, trying to regain control. But deep down, those words no longer seemed as solid as before. He watched me for a few more seconds, as if evaluating every detail, every breath, every reaction, then took a step back. "Go back to work," he said finally. But the voice was different, less distant, more thoughtful. I nodded quickly and turned around, but this time when I started walking, I felt clearly. His gaze still on me, and it wasn't an ordinary look. It was like I had been marked in some invisible way. Something that couldn't be undone. I spent the rest of the night trying to ignore it, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, the image came back. The room, the people kneeling, and that feeling that I belonged there not as a servant, but like something completely different. When I finally managed to lie down, sleep came heavy, but it didn't bring rest. I brought more. Much more. I was on my feet again, in the same place, but this time the image was clearer, more real. The people before me were not shadows. They were faces, looks full of respect and fear. I felt something pulse inside my chest, strong, dominant, natural, as if that was who I really was. So, a voice came from behind me. "Don't look back," he said, but I looked. And what I saw made my whole body free. Because it wasn't unknown, it was too familiar, and at the same time impossible. I woke up suddenly, breathing hard. The room was dark, silent, but my body still reacted as if I were there. My heart was beating too fast. My unsteady breathing and a single certainty slowly formed. Those weren't dreams, and if they weren't dreams, then there was something inside me that was trying to emerge, something I never knew, but now it was beginning to reveal itself in a way that I couldn't stop. I sat on the bed for a long time without moving. The room was still in darkness, but that no longer mattered. Darkness wasn't the problem. The problem was what I had seen, or rather, what I had sensed. Because it wasn't just a picture, it was presence, it was reality. My body still carried that feeling of strength pulsing, as if it hadn't completely disappeared. As if a part of me was still in that other place. I put my hand on my chest, trying to steady my breathing. But there was something different, something that wasn't there before. A rhythm strong. I need almost like a second beat. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to push it away, but it only got worse. The same room appeared again. Sharper, nearest I could feel the ground beneath my feet. I could hear the sound of people breathing around me. And then a new perception came. I wasn't just seeing, I was remembering. I got up quickly, as if the movement could break it. I walked to the small bedroom window and pushed the wood harder than necessary. The cold air rushed in all at once, cutting royal. I needed something real, something that would keep me there, in that body, in that life. But even the cold wasn't enough, because inside me something had already changed, and he didn't seem willing to go back. The castle was slowly waking up. I could hear the first steps in the hallways, the start of another day, and for the first time since I arrived, that seemed wrong to me, as if I were out of place, not in space, but in existence itself. I left the room. Before anyone could notice anything, I followed the corridors with controlled steps, but my attention was elsewhere. Every detail around seemed more intense, more defined, like my senses are magnified. I could hear distant conversations, feeling movements before you even see them, and that this wasn't normal. I turned down a hallway and almost bumped into another servant. She immediately backed away, lowering her head. "Sorry," whispered, but before I could respond, something happened. An impulse, fast, instinctive for a second. I knew exactly what she was feeling. Fear, but not for me, of something bigger. Something she didn't even understand. I blinked in confusion, and the moment passed. She walked away quickly, as if she didn't want to prolong it. And I stood there, trying to understand, but the answer was already beginning to form. Even if I didn't want to accept, I continued walking until I reached the ward where I had worked the night before. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't the same anymore, and the feeling of being watched returned. Stronger, more constant. I stopped. I took a deep breath and I turned slowly. He was there as if it had always been a few meters away, observing. No rush, no hiding. "How long?" did he ask. The question came straight, as if he already knew the answer. "I didn't understand," I replied, but this time, my voice wasn't as firm as before. "You started feeling it yesterday," he said. It wasn't a question, it was affirmation. My silence confirmed more than any words. He approached slowly, and his every step seemed to echo inside me, not just in the environment, but inside me, as if something responded to his presence, something I didn't control. "Tell me what you saw," continued. I hesitated, but I realized that lying wouldn't work. "Not with him." "A room," I responded, "people kneeling, and I stopped, because saying it out loud made everything more real. "You in the center," he completed. My gaze went up automatically. Surprise, he knew how to. "You know," I asked, but deep down I already suspected. He didn't respond immediately, just watched me, and then he said something that made my whole body go cold. "'Cause I've seen it before." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with meaning. Before, where my voice was almost inaudible, he took another step. Now, close enough for me to feel his heat. "And you said." That didn't make sense, and at the same time, it made more sense than anything else. I took a step back. Instinctively, I didn't say, but the word sounded weak, even to me. He tilted his head slightly, as if he were analyzing not my words, but what was behind them. "You still don't understand," he said. "But you will understand." My heart squeezed, not because of the tone, but for sure. His certainty was scarier than any threat. "I've never been here before," I said, trying to regain some control. "I was never." That he kept his gaze fixed on mine. And then he said calmly, "It doesn't matter, because what you were, it's still there." The words hit deep, destroying the last layer of denial I was still trying to maintain. I felt it again. That pulse inside me, stronger, more present, as if responding directly to what he said. "I'm not that," I repeated, but this time it didn't seem true. He took one last step, completely eliminating the distance between us, and then, without warning, he placed 2 fingers lightly on my wrist. The world stopped. There was no pain, but there was an impact, as a silent discharge that ran through my entire body. Images came quick, intense, fragments of something bigger, and in the middle of it all, a clear feeling, undeniable recognition. I pulled my arm back, panting. "What was that?" My voice was broken, but he didn't seem surprised. On the contrary, it seemed to confirm something I already suspected. "Exactly what I thought," he said in a low voice. And at that moment, I realized this wasn't just beginning. This had already started a long time ago. And I was the only one who still didn't understand. My breathing was still ragged when I pulled his hand away. But the feeling didn't go away. She remained there, running through my body like I found a path that's always been waiting to be activated. I took another step back, trying to regain some control over myself, but there was something wrong. The space seemed smaller, the densest air, and he didn't take his eyes off me, as if my every reaction was a piece of a puzzle he was already putting together. "What did you see?" he asked. The voice remained low, but now there was something more real interest. I hesitated, but the images were still too fresh to ignore. "Fragments," replied places. I stopped for a second, trying to organize it, but it didn't make complete sense. "None of this." I completed. He tilted his head slightly, as if you disagree without having to say it. "Memories don't come out of nowhere," he said. My stomach tightened because deep down, I knew he was right, but accepting that meant destroying everything I believed about myself. "I've always been like that," I said alone. "No past, without anyone." The words came out more loaded than I intended, because they were true, or at least they were all I had. He took a sidestep, walking slowly around me like I was analyzing not just who I was, but what I hid even from myself, or what they hid from you. He said. I turned my face, following the movement. "That doesn't change anything," I replied. But my voice no longer carried the same conviction. He stopped behind me close enough that I felt your presence like a constant pressure change everything. He said, "Because something was taken from you, it's because it mattered." The words remained in the air, heavy, inescapable, and for the first time, I considered it for real. What if my life wasn't complete, but only what's left? A shiver ran down my spine. Not out of fear, but of perception. I took a few more steps away, creating space between us. "Why do you care?" I asked finally. It was the question that hadn't left my mind since the beginning. He could just ignore me, send me away, or worse. But he didn't do any of that. On the contrary, he was there observing, testing, waiting. It took him a few seconds to respond. And when he responded, the answer was to direct, because I feel my heart skipped a beat. Feel what I asked. But I already knew it wasn't a... He looked at me differently this time, less like someone analyzing, and more like someone trying to understand something that also affected. "You said it wasn't fear yesterday," he said, "and it's not." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain stability. "So what is the question?" Came out lower, more loaded, because now I also wanted to know. He held my gaze longer than usual, as if deciding how far to go, and then said, "Recognition." The word echoed inside me in a way that made everything around me disappear for an instant. "Repeat." "Recognition," without fully understanding but feeling. "Yes," he said, as if a part of me already knew you, and a part of you already knew who I am. My entire body reacted, because that made too much sense. Even without explanation, even without logic, that's exactly what it looked like. From the first moment I looked away, trying to regain control. "That's not possible," I said, but my voice no longer carried certainty. He didn't respond immediately, just got closer once more, but this time there was no aggressive tension. It was different, more controlled, deeper. "Have you noticed that no one here comes close to you?" he said. I frowned slightly, because now that he has spoken, I remembered the looks, the subtle departures, the silence around me. "They feel," he continued, "even if they don't understand, feel what you are." That made something inside me move stronger, more present. As if being called, I didn't do anything, I said, almost like a defense. "And there's no need," he replied. That's when I realized the problem wasn't what I did, that's what I was, and that I didn't know how to deny this. And the silence that formed between us this time was not empty. It was full of unspoken answers, of possibilities that I still couldn't fully accept, but they were already there waiting. I took another deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "If you've seen this before," I spoke slowly, "so you know what's happening to..." He watched me carefully, and for the first time there was a short pause before the answer. "I know enough, but not everything." That didn't bring me relief, but it brought something more dangerous, curiosity, and maybe a need to understand. Even if it changed everything, and deep down, I already knew that was changing. The word still echoed in my mind persistently: recognition. The more I thought about it, but it stopped, seeming absurd, and more began to fit into place in an unsettling way. I never had clear memories of my past. I never had names, faces, places, just loose fragments that I always ignored. But now these fragments seemed to take shape. And that changed everything. I looked up at him again. "If you know enough," I spoke slowly, So tell me what I am. The question came out firmer than I expected. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was necessary. He held my gaze, and for a moment, I got the feeling he was weighing how far he could go. Or as far as I was ready to hear what you are cannot be explained in a few words, he said. My patience strained. So try, I replied, because I'm not going to keep walking in this place without understanding what's happening to me. There was a small silence, and then he came closer once more. But this time, no pressure, no domain presence, only you don't belong here, he began. My chest tightened, not as a surprise, but as a confirmation, because deep down, I already felt this. You were brought here, continued, but not to serve. The words hung in the air, heavy, loaded with meaning. So why don't I remember anything? I asked, my voice lower now, most vulnerable. Because someone wanted you not to remember, he replied. Direct, without hesitation, a cold ran through my entire body. Not because of the tone, but what did that imply? That doesn't make sense, I said, but my own mind was already starting to create possibilities. Who would do this, and why he didn't respond immediately, but his look changed more serious, closer, as if that part of the truth wasn't so simple to say. There are things in this territory that are not said openly, he said at last. And there are forces that prefer to keep certain truths hidden, that just made everything heavier, more complex, and more dangerous. I took a step back, trying to organize it. Do you think someone did this to me on purpose? There was no longer any doubt. It was almost certain he didn't look away. I don't think so, replied. I'm almost sure. My heart accelerated, but this time it wasn't just because of the strange feeling between us, it was because of reality. That it began to form. If this is true, I said. Slowly, so I'm not just a servant. The words came out strange, as if they weren't mine, as if they belonged to someone I didn't know yet. He shook his head slightly. No, you never were. The silence that followed was unlike any other. There wasn't just tension, there was revelation. Even incomplete, she was enough to change everything. I ran my hand over my face, trying to keep control. That's impossible, I muttered. But every part of me was starting to accept because it explained to many things, my lack of past, the sensations, people's reactions, until he, mainly him. Why do you feel this way about me? I asked. Suddenly the question came before I could stop it, but it was inevitable. He didn't hesitate this time. Because you're not just anyone. And what does that mean? He took a small step forward, and this time there wasn't enough distance to avoid the impact of his presence. It means you carry something rare, replied, something that shouldn't be hidden. My body reacted immediately, that same feeling, more intense now. As if responding directly to his words, I closed my eyes for a second, and it was enough. Another image appeared, stronger, clearer. I was in that room again. But this time, something was different. I wasn't just standing, I was being watched, evaluated, and there was someone by my side. A firm presence, protective eye, tried to focus, tried to see the face, but the image began to fade. I opened my eyes quickly, taking in air. What was it? He asked. I hesitated, but I responded. There was someone with me. In vision, my gaze met his, and for the first time, something like real tension appeared in his expression. Someone important? Asked. I don't know, I replied. But it seemed I stopped trying to find the right word. It seemed like this person wasn't there by chance. He was silent for a moment, and that told me more than any answer. Do you know who it is? I said, not how quick. But as an observation, he looked away for a brief second, and that was all I needed. Knowing changes a lot of things, he said. My stomach tightened. So tell me anyway, I replied, but he looked at me again, and this time there was something more there. Something deeper, haven't said yet, because when you remember, it won't be just a memory. It will be a comeback. The words hit hard because they didn't sound like a possibility. They sounded like certainty. And deep down, I knew that no matter how hard I tried to resist, that thing inside me was already waking up. And when it was over, nothing would be like before, returned the word. Stuck with me like something that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't just about remembering. It was about becoming again. And that this was far more dangerous than any lost memory. I remained silent for a few moments, trying to process everything. But there was no way to organize it in a simple way. Every answer he gave me opened up more questions, and at the same time, closed doors I didn't even know existed. If I'm going back, I said slowly, so why now? Why here? He didn't respond immediately, but this time it didn't seem like hesitation. It felt like a choice. Because you've reached the limit, he said. My gaze narrowed slightly limit of what to remain hidden. He replied simple, direct, but it wasn't. None of that was. I crossed my arms trying to contain the tension growing inside me. And who decided this? I asked. He looked at me for a few seconds, and then he said something that made everything around him seem even more unstable. Maybe yourself. I let out a short breath, almost ironic. I don't remember choosing any of this, but your body remembered. He replied, your mind may have been blocked, but the rest of you wasn't. It hit deeper than I expected, because it explained that constant feeling, that impulse, that recognition that didn't make sense. I was silent, but this time it wasn't for lack of words. It was because I was beginning to understand. It was accepting. If someone did this to me, I spoke after a few seconds. If someone deleted everything so that person is still around, the logic was inevitable and dangerous, he didn't deny. On the contrary, his gaze became even more attentive. Yes, he said, and you're probably waiting. My body reacted immediately, waiting for what he took a step closer. The proximity was now no longer just physical, strategic era, the moment you will completely remember. My stomach contracted because that didn't sound like a good thing, sounded like a plan. And if I don't want to? I said. The question came out before I could contain it. But it was real, because despite everything, despite curiosity from the impulse, there was fear, scared of what I could become, or worse, of what I once was. He watched me carefully. Like this was the first time I'd actually shown any weakness. Then you've already lost, he replied. Direct, without softening. My gaze quickly rose. What does this mean? It means it's no longer a choice, he said. This has already started, and it will end with or without your will. The silence that formed was heavy, but there was no denying I felt inside me. Increasingly stronger, more present, like something that grew out of control. I looked away for a moment, trying to compose myself. But something else caught my attention. Something different, a new sensation. I raised my head slowly. Do you feel this? I asked, my voice lower now, more focused. He didn't respond right away, but I saw he had also realized the environment around us felt different, more tense. As if something is approaching, something that was not part of the routine in that place. They know, he said. My heart accelerated. Who? Those who did this to you, responded. The words came as a warning, not as a theory, but how sure I felt. A shiver go up my spine, but it wasn't fear, it was a reaction. Like something inside me is getting ready instinctively for something bigger. I've never seen anyone strange here, I said. But my own perception was already starting to fail, because now I felt attendance distant, but real. You wouldn't, he said. They don't need to appear. That only made everything more dangerous, more invisible, and harder to control. I took a step back. But this time, it wasn't about running away. It was to create space, to think, to breathe. What do? I asked. And this time, there was no resistance in my voice. Just need. He watched me for a few seconds and then said, you stop running away. The words were direct, but not aggressive. It was guidance. Do not order. I've never been running away, I responded automatically. But the sentence died in the middle, because it wasn't true. I've always been running away. Even without knowing what he realized, of course you noticed, and that's why I don't You start paying attention to everything he said in you, and others, what you feel before you even understand. Because this, he made a small gesture, indicating the space between us. This will guide you. I took a deep breath, trying to absorb it. And for the first time since it all started, I didn't just feel confusion. I felt direction, even if it was still uncertain, even if it was dangerous. Something inside me responded to that, like I finally found a way. And instead of resisting, I just let this feeling grow, even without knowing where it would take me. Because deep down, I already knew that there was no going back. I didn't respond right away, but this time it wasn't out of doubt. It was because for the first time, I was listening to something inside me more closely than anything else around, and that wasn't confusing. I wasn't lost. It was clear, silent. But of course, I closed my eyes for a moment. I took a deep breath. And instead of trying to block, I left. I let that feeling grow, spread, take space. And the moment I stopped resisting, everything. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't something sudden. It was deeper than that. As if a layer had been removed, and the world revealed something that was always there, but I never got to see. When I opened my eyes, the castle looked the same, but I didn't see it the same way anymore. The sounds were more defined, the clearest moves, the presences, much clearer. I could feel every person in that place, not just where they were. But how were they? It was instinctive, natural, as if it had always been part of me, he said. The voice came calmly, but there was something attentive about her. I didn't look at him right away. I was still absorbing. I was still understanding, yes. I finally answered, and that was the first time that I said something without hesitation, without a doubt, no fear. He got a little closer, but this time his presence didn't pressure me. She lined up as if we were on the same frequency. Tell me what changed, you asked. It took me a few seconds to organize, but not because it was difficult. It was because there was a lot. I can feel it. I spoke slowly. Everything the words came out almost in a whisper, but they carried weight, meaning he didn't seem surprised. On the contrary, it seemed to confirm something I already expected. And what do you feel now? Asked. I took a deep breath, and I let perception guide me. I closed my eyes again for a moment, and then it came strong. Of course, direct danger, I replied. The word came out effortlessly, and in the same second. The environment around us seemed to react, not visibly but noticeable, as if something had been activated. Where he asked immediately, I slightly turned my head. Without thinking, just following instinct down below, I replied deeper, further away. But coming towards us when I opened my eyes, he was already watching me differently. No more with doubt, but sure they arrived. He said, my body didn't back down. This time, there was no fear. There was readiness. What do they want? I asked, but deep down I already knew. You replied, he simple, direct, bluntly. My chest tightened, but it wasn't weakness, it was recognition, 'cause everything was starting to fall into place. They hid. You said before, I said, so now they're coming to finish what they started. He didn't deny, didn't soften. Yes, I said, but something changed. I noticed it in the way he spoke. It wasn't just my problem, it was something bigger. They didn't expect you to wake up, he added. And that changes the game. I let out a slow breath, feeling that energy inside me grow. Adjust, sign up, and for the first time, I didn't try to control. I didn't try to hide. I just accepted. What do? I asked again, but this time, my voice carried no doubt, carried decision. He took a small step forward, and now the distance between us no longer existed. Now, he said, you stop seeing yourself as small. The words were direct, but it doesn't last, and they hit exactly where they needed to, because that was it. That's what still held me back. The idea that I was just someone trying to survive, when in fact, I was something much bigger. You are not being hunted because you are weak, he continued. You are being hunted because you are a threat that changed everything. Not by logic, but by the way I felt. Something inside me responded immediately. Like I'm finally being called by the right name. I straightened my posture without realizing. My shoulders adjusted, my breathing has stabilized. And the feeling of instability disappeared, replaced with something firmer, more solid, more real. If they came here, I said, so they won't stop. He kept his gaze on me. No, and neither should you. The silence that followed was not heavy, it was clear, objective, no room for doubt. I turned my face slightly direction from where I felt that presence approaching, now even stronger nearest, and something inside me reacted. Not afraid, but with recognition, as if that was also part of my story, even though I still don't remember completely. They are closer, I said, the low voice, but firm. He nodded. So this is where you find out who you really are. I didn't respond. But this time, no, because I didn't know but why. For the first time I was ready to find out, and more than that, I was ready to accept, even if it meant leaving behind everything I thought I was, because deep down, that no longer defined me. I remained motionless, but not out of hesitation. It was concentration. Everything inside me was aligning in a way I had never felt before. Every sound, every presence, every movement in the castle seemed to connect to me in some invisible way. And the more I paid attention, it became clearer. They were already inside it. Was no longer a distant approach. It was real presence, scattered, silent, strategic. They didn't enter through the main door. I spoke quietly. My mind is already organizing it effortlessly. They split, they're moving like they know the place. He didn't seem surprised. He just confirmed it with a slight nod of the head. They study before acting, said. They always studied. That made something inside me react like an echo. A memory that was not yet complete, but it was already beginning to I closed my eyes for a brief second, and then I felt three distinct moving fast, controlled, and a room slower, heavier, most dangerous, for I said, opening my eyes. One of them I stopped, because the feeling was different, stronger, more familiar. He realized immediately. What has he asked? I hesitated, but not without a doubt. It was difficult to put into words. This, I took a deep breath. It's different. He didn't respond right away, but his expression became more serious. As if I expected something like this, leadership said finally. My gaze met his yes. But not only that, I took a step forward without realizing the sensation increased like something is pulling me. As if that specific point was directly linked to me. I know that I said it quietly, but I don't know how. The words came out almost like an involuntary recognition. Approached once more, but now there was urgency in his presence. If you know, then they know, to said. My entire body reacted because that made so much sense. If there is a connection, it is not one-sided. They feel you too. That changed the weight of the situation. It wasn't just an invasion, it was a date. And not just any date, a meeting that was destined long before I understood anything. I turned my body towards the strongest present. Without thinking, without hesitation, they are coming here, I said. Direct, of course, no margin for error. He wasted no time. So let's not wait, said. The decision came quickly. As someone who was already prepared for that moment, but before he moved, something inside me reacted, stronger than anything so far. An impulse, one certainty. I didn't say. My voice was firm, different. He stopped immediately, looking at me carefully. Why? I took a deep breath. And for the first time, I didn't need to think to answer. 'Cause this isn't just about them coming to me. The words began to form themselves, guided by something deeper. It's about me going to them. The silence that followed was brief, but loaded, because that changed everything. Are you sure? He asked. But there was no doubt in his voice. It was just confirmation. I nodded slowly, feeling that energy inside me firm up even more. If I stay here, they're still in control, I said. But if I go to them, I change it. He watched me for a few seconds, and then a faint sign of approval appeared. Almost imperceptible. So you've already started to... I didn't respond, but I knew he was right. Because that wasn't blind impulse, it was strategy. It was instinct. It was something that came from a place much older than my memory. I started walking without waiting, without asking permission, just following the direction my own body indicated. And with every step, the feeling grew stronger, clearer. As if the distance is closing too fast, he accompanied me without question, and that said a lot. Because he wasn't guiding me anymore, I was following. The hallways looked different now. Narrower, most loaded, as if the castle itself felt what was happening. I became a runner, without hesitation, then another, and one more, until it suddenly stops. They are here, I said, the low voice, but firm. The door in front of me looked like any other, but it wasn't. I felt on the other side. The presence, strong, concentrated, waiting. There is no saw, more doubt, not afraid, just certainty. I took another step forward, and I stopped at the door. My hand slowly rose, but before touching, something inside me pulsed, strong, intense, and for a second, images returned. Clearer than ever, not just the room, but faces, voices, and that same feeling, command of belonging. I opened my eyes, and this time there was no confusion, just recognition. They didn't come to hunt me. I spoke quietly. More for me than for him, they came to find me. And the moment my hand touched the door, I already knew that this wasn't the beginning of a confrontation. It was the reunion of something that never ceased to exist within me. My hand remained on the door for a second too long, not out of fear, but because in that brief moment, everything inside me completely aligned. As if each scattered fragment finally found its place, breathing stabilized, the heart slowed down, and the feeling of doubt disappeared. I was no longer someone trying to understand what was happening. I was part of that, and that was part of me. I pushed the door, no rush, no strength. But with decision, it opened in silence, revealing the space on the other side. The room was large, but different from the others in the castle, emptier, colder, as if it wasn't used for living, but for something specific, something that required isolation. They were there exactly where I felt, three strict position, and the room further ahead. Closest to the center, none of them showed surprise, and that confirmed everything they already knew. My eyes went through each one, without hesitation, without deviating, and something changed instantly the way they watched me. There was no superiority, there was no contempt, there was caution and recognition. "She finally woke up," said one of them, the low voice, but loaded with meaning. My body didn't react like it used. There was no uncontrolled tension. "Just pay attention." "Who are you?" I asked, but not as someone seeking protection, and yes, like someone demanding answers. The man in front took a light step, enough to assume the central position. "We are the ones who made sure you disappeared," replied. Direct, bluntly. My chest tightened, but not by surprise. It was confirmation. "So, it was you," I said. The firm voice, "You took everything from me," he didn't deny. Didn't try to smooth it out. "Yes," I said, "and I would do it again." The silence that followed was not one of shock. It was processing, because that was the missing. "You didn't do this by chance," I continued. "There was reason. There is always." The three behind him remained motionless. "But pay attention, ready." He held my gaze, and then he replied, "You were unstable." My body reacted, not physically, but internally, as if something rejected that definition. Unstable, repeat, but the word didn't fit. Not with what I felt now. "You had too much uncontrolled power," he continued, "and that put everything at risk." I took a step forward without realizing, without thinking. "And even so, everything inside me was under control. So you decided to erase who I was." The question was loaded, but he didn't lose his firmness. "We don't delete it," replied. "We just seal the difference mattered, and I felt it, even without fully understanding." "And now," I said, "what do you intend to do?" He watched for a few seconds, and for the first time there was something different. Something like calculus. "Like someone adjusting a plan that depends on you," replied. My gaze narrowed. "How, if you're still the same as before, the one who couldn't control what she carried?" He took a short break. "So we finish what we started." The words came as a clear threat, but they didn't have the expected effect, because something inside me reacted in the opposite way. Not like fear, but like rejection. "I'm not the same anymore," he said, and this time it wasn't an attempt to convince them. It was sure. He tilted his head slightly. "How to analyze that?" as if looking for signs of error. "And what are you now?" asked the question. Remained in the air. But the answer was already in me. I felt strong gift complete. I took one more step. Now, inside the room, no backing down. Without hesitation. "I am someone who no longer needs to be hidden," I replied. The energy within me responded immediately, as if confirming every word. The three behind him moved, almost imperceptible. Instinctive reaction, but the man in front didn't back down, didn't advance, just watched. "Then prove it," he said. The phrase was not an empty challenge, it was a test, a limit, and I understood. It wasn't about fighting, it was about showing. I took a deep breath. And instead of forcing, I let that presence inside me expand, manifest. No fear, no blocking, no denial. The environment has changed. Not visibly, but noticeable. Heavy, intense, as if space itself responded to it. The three behind him retreated half a step. Without realizing, but he remained. "And that said a lot. Interesting," he said, "base. But of course, you have really changed." I didn't respond, but I kept my gaze steady. Because at that moment, there was no more room for doubt. Not even to hide, not even to deny. The truth was already there, and everyone in that room could feel. He then took a step forward, and for the first time, tension reached a new level. "So maybe it was a mistake," he said. "Don't finish it." The silence that followed was not long, but it was enough, because at that moment, it was clear. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a fate fit, and this time I was no longer on the side that needed to escape. The air in the room felt heavier by the second, but it wasn't something that put pressure on me. It was something that answered, as if the environment recognized what was happening, as if you knew that this wasn't just a confrontation, it was definition. He took another step forward, and this time I didn't back down. On the contrary, my body remained firm, anchored, like I finally found the right place to exist. "Do you think you've changed?" he said, "but you still don't understand what you're carrying." The phrase came as a provocation, but it didn't hit me the same way it did before. Because now, I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to be. I don't need to understand everything. I replied the calm voice, but loaded with something that not even I completely recognized. I just need to stop denying the silence that followed was different. There was no doubt in him, review only, and that changed the dynamic because now he was no longer dealing with someone lost. He was dealing with something that was beginning to assert itself. The three behind him moved again, more tense, more prepared, but still hesitant, and I felt they weren't afraid of what I might do. They were afraid of what I already was. You were always the one out of control. And that's why it had to be contained. I took another step forward, closing the distance between us even further, and even so, none of them advanced, none of them attacked. Because something there prevented, something that didn't need strength to exist if I was out of control before I spoke. So why am I so stable now? The question wasn't just for him, it was for me too, but the answer was already emerging. He realized, of course, you noticed, and that's why it took a little longer to respond. 'Cause you're not alone anymore, he said. My gaze narrowed slightly, and for the first time, I felt it clearly, not just their presence, but another thing. Something deeper, more connected. I slightly turned my face, without taking his attention completely, but expanding my perception. And then I understood it wasn't just about me, never been that bond. That feeling from the beginning, it was no coincidence. It wasn't confusion, it was a connection. I looked back at him, and this time, there was no doubt you already knew. I said base, but straight. He didn't respond, but I didn't need. Because the confirmation was already there in every detail, in every choice, in every silence. You didn't keep me here by chance, I continued. It wasn't just to watch me, it was to make sure I wasn't taken away. The silence that followed was longer, but he didn't deny. He just held my gaze like someone who finally didn't need to hide anymore. And then he said, I needed to be sure. My heart beat faster, but it was no surprise, it was understanding. Sure of what my voice was, firm but lower, as if I already knew the answer, that you would go back to who you really are, he said. And when that happened, you wouldn't be against. The words remained in the air, heavy, but not threatening, and that changed everything, because that wasn't control, it was choice. You were waiting for me to choose, I said. He nodded slightly. It's always been about that. I took a deep breath, feeling everything inside me align in a definitive way. The memories were not yet complete, but it no longer mattered, because the essence, that part that really defined who I was, it was already their gift, entire. I took one more step, now completely within their space. No resistance, no fear, without a doubt. Then you failed, said the man in front coldly. Attention returned to him immediately. He looked between me and the other man, as if I finally understood something. I didn't expect you. Let her wake up, the accusation, loaded with tension, but there was no longer any impact on, because that no longer defined me. It was no longer about what they did to me. It was about what I chose now. I turned my body completely towards him, and this time there was no trace of the servant who entered that castle. The posture, the look, the presence, everything had changed. You never had control over this, I said. Calm down, but absolute just delayed. The three behind him moved in, clearer now. But still they hesitated, because the same perception was already in them that was no longer something that could be contained in the same way. He frowned slightly, and for the first time, there was something that wasn't calculation. It was uncertain. So show us, he said. The hardest voice, now more urgent. If you really changed taste. Silence fell over the room. But this time, it wasn't heavy, it was definitive. I closed my eyes for a brief second, not to run away, but to feel, and there at that moment, everything fell into place. Memories didn't come as fragments, they came as understanding, as identity. How true, I didn't need to see everything, because I was already all that when I opened my eyes again. Nothing around me seemed different, but I knew I was no longer the same. I was never just someone trying to survive. I was never just someone with no past. I was always what they feared and what they tried to hide. I took one last step forward, and this time nobody moved. No one tried to stop, because everyone there already knew there was no turning back. There was no longer any way to contain it. And there was no longer any doubt. I wasn't there to be tested, not even to run away. I was there to take on exactly what was always. No need for permission, no need for confirmation, just being, and that was enough to change everything.